She vanished after that summer. Today, she returned, holding the wedding dress I chose for her. The California sun was hard enough to turn the white planks of my front porch almost silver. But the first thing I noticed was not the heat or the distant drag of surf against the rocks. It was the cheap wooden hanger. The hanger was the kind sold in a pack of 6 at a discount store, unfinished along the edges and bent slightly under the weight of what it carried. Ivory silk spilled from it in heavy folds. Tiny beads caught the light and flashed against the porch shadows. The dress was too expensive for the hanger, too formal for my doorway, and too familiar for the 3 years of silence I had forced myself to survive. I kept my eyes on the wood grain for 1 extra second, because looking at the woman holding it would make the past real. Then Elena Parker said my name. Nathan. The second syllable broke. I looked up. She stood outside my house with coastal wind in her hair, a modest cream cardigan pulled closed over a black blouse, and both hands locked around the hook of the hanger. The dress hung between us like a question neither of us had been brave enough to ask. Her eyes moved once toward the street, then back to me. The movement was fast, trained by fear. Her thumb rubbed the same splinter in the hanger until a thin red line appeared at the edge of her nail. 3 years ago, Elena had vanished after that summer without a note, a warning, or one final argument. I had come home to an empty apartment, a stack of returned books on my table, and a silence so complete that for months I still turned when I heard her kind of footsteps. Now she was standing on my porch holding the wedding dress I had once pointed to in a boutique window and called hers. I did not ask where she had been. I did not ask why she had left. I had spent 9 years as a crisis negotiator, learning that the first question in a true emergency was never the question your pride wanted answered. The first question was always whether the person in front of you could breathe. Her stance was angled toward the driveway. Her pupils were wide. The cheap hanger creaked under her grip. Whoever she had run from, some part of her still expected him to appear behind her. I stepped back and opened the door wider. "You can come in," I said, "or we can talk on the porch. Your call." Her eyes flicked past me into the house. She swallowed once, then stepped over the threshold. I closed the door, but I did not lock it until I looked back at her. "Do you want the deadbolt?" "Yes," she said, "please." Only then did I turn the lock and slide the secondary chain into place. The metal clicked with a clean, final sound. Elena's shoulders lowered by less than an inch. But in my work, less than an inch could be the difference between running and staying. She carried the dress into my living room and laid it across the back of the leather armchair. The silk spilled over the dark leather, out of place among the austere bookshelves, negotiation manuals, and framed commendations I never knew where to hang. The cheap wooden hanger remained in her hand. She did not seem to realize she was still holding it. "I'm supposed to be at the Coastal Country Club right now," she said. The words came out too quickly. "I'm supposed to be walking down the aisle in 3 hours. "To Grant Harris," I said. Her mouth tightened at the name. Grant Harris was not famous, but in California development circles, he was the kind of man who appeared whenever an old neighborhood suddenly became profitable. I had seen his name in municipal filings, zoning fights, and hostile acquisitions that looked clean on paper and rotten in motive. Elena looked at the dress, then at the locked door. "He owns my family's architectural firm," she said. "Not openly, not on letterhead, last year. When my father got sick, Grant bought a distressed loan through a shell company. I found the holding documents a month ago. There's a default clause buried inside the asset agreement. If I don't marry him today, if I don't sign the spousal asset merger by 5 o'clock, he can trigger the clause, freeze my parents' accounts, and liquidate the firm before Monday." The room stayed quiet except for the faint ticking of the old wall clock above my kitchen doorway. I listened for what she did not say. Why here? Why now? Why me? She answered the first two without prompting. "I drove to the venue," she said. "I parked in the bridal entrance. I sat there looking at the dress bag in the passenger seat and the merger papers in my purse. I tried to tell myself it was just a contract. I've signed ugly contracts before. Then, I saw my mother through the window holding my father's cufflinks, and I couldn't make my hand open the car door. She lifted the cheap hanger slightly, so I took the dress out of the bag, got back in the car, and drove until the road turned familiar. My name sat unspoken between us. I walked to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and placed it on the table nearest her. I did not push it into her hand. "Your hands are shaking," I said. "Drink when you can." She stared at the glass as if it had appeared from another century. Then she set the hanger down beside it and took a slow sip. "I need help," she said. "I know." "No." Her fingers tightened around the glass. "I don't need someone to hide me. I need someone who can negotiate against a man who thinks every person in the room is a lever." That was the practical buy-in. Not romance, not history, a problem. I could work with a problem. "I can help you map his leverage," I said. "I can help you build a containment plan. I can help you document extortion if he makes the threat out loud, but I will not make decisions for you. If you want to leave this house, you leave. If you want a hotel, I call one. If you want an attorney on the line before I touch one page, I get one." Her eyes lifted to mine. 3 years had passed, but I still knew the look she got when a line held. "I want you to help me," she said, "and I want the attorney." I nodded once and reached for my phone. Before I could dial, the gate intercom buzzed. Elena froze. Water trembled in the glass. One drop slid over her knuckle and hit the floor. I held up 2 fingers, not as an order but as a signal. Wait, breathe. Then I crossed to the wall monitor. A man in a gray suit stood at my front gate with one hand resting near his pocket and the other holding a phone. He was not Grant. His posture was too blank for a fiancé and too deliberate for a concerned friend. A private contractor. A fixer. Grant had tracked her car faster than I expected. Elena moved behind me, but stopped before she reached the window. "What do you want to do?" I asked quietly. She looked at the monitor. The color had left her face, but her voice came out clear. "I don't want him in this house." "Then he does not come in." I tapped the intercom. "This is Nathan Reed." The man looked up at the camera. "Mr. Reed, my name is Vance. I represent Grant Harris. We believe a distressed individual arrived at this address a few minutes ago. Mr. Harris is concerned for his fiancée's safety. We'd like to escort her back to the venue." Elena's fingers found the edge of the table behind her and held on. I kept my voice low. In a hostage situation, the person talking the loudest is usually the one with the least control. That was the first lesson I had learned from a tired captain on my 3rd week of training, and it had saved more lives than force ever had. "You are standing on private property," I said. "The adult citizen you are looking for arrived voluntarily and has revoked consent to any wedding or transport connected to your employer." Vance smiled at the camera as if I had said something quaint. "It's not wise to interfere in family matters, Mr. Reed. There are financial obligations involved. If Ms. Parker makes an emotional mistake today, several innocent people may suffer consequences." There it was. Not a confession, not enough for a clean criminal charge by itself, but enough for a pattern. "Elena," I said without turning from the monitor, "do you consent to audio preservation of this interaction for possible legal use?" "Yes," she said immediately. I tapped the recording icon and let the red light appear on the screen. "Vance," I said, "you just linked Ms. Parker's refusal to attend a wedding with financial consequences against her family. Continue only if you intend to make Mr. Harris's extortion theory easier to brief." His smile thinned. "It would be unfortunate," he said carefully, "if old family mistakes were exposed because of cold feet. Unfortunate is not a legal category." I kept my tone flat. "Leave the property. If you or your employer attempt to remove Ms. Parker, contact her, threaten her family, or trigger a default clause before counsel reviews the underlying transaction, I will advise her attorney to file for emergency injunctive relief and preserve all communications as evidence of retaliatory pressure." Vance glanced down at his phone. For 1 second, his expression broke. Whoever was listening on the other end had not expected the woman in the wedding dress to choose a crisis negotiator's porch. He stepped back. "I'll relay your position. You do that." I ended the call only after he walked down the drive and got into a black sedan. The taillights disappeared toward the coast road. Behind me, Elena set the water glass down with a small, careful sound. "He'll pivot," she said. I looked at her. She had always understood strategy faster than anyone in a room. Even terrified, she was already seeing the next move. "Yes," I said, "he will." I called Miles Hayes first. Miles had been my closest colleague for 6 years, a former prosecutor turned crisis counsel who collected fountain pens he never used because he claimed ballpoints lacked moral seriousness. He answered on the second ring. "Nathan," he said, "please tell me you're calling because you finally learned how to grill fish without making it taste like office carpet." "I need emergency counsel on a coercive merger clause," I said. "Wedding deadline, predatory loan buyout, possible shell company concealment. We have 3 hours before the first deadline and 48 before asset liquidation." There was a pause. "I hate when you skip the hello," Miles said. Then papers rustled. "Put me on speaker." Elena's mouth moved for the first time in something close to a smile. I set the phone in the center of the kitchen island and turned to her. "You don't have to tell either of us anything you don't want documented, but if you want to stop him, we need the paper trail." She pulled a laptop from her tote bag, then a folder, then a narrow stack of printed ledgers wrapped in a rubber band. "The paper trail is why I came," she said. For the next 6 hours, my home office became a war room. It was not cinematic in the way people imagine a rescue should be. There were no speeches, no dramatic embraces, no sudden miracle. There was a dry erase board, 2 laptops, 3 empty water glasses, Miles on a secure line, and the cheap wooden hanger lying across the edge of my desk because Elena kept reaching for it whenever Grant's name appeared on a document. I wrote dates in black marker. Elena filled gaps with invoices, emails, board minutes, and archived drawings from the Parker firm. Miles translated the legal risk into plain language and swore mildly at the holding company structure before apologizing to my very polite haunted house, as he called my office. At 6:42, the wedding deadline passed. Elena looked at the clock. No one spoke. Her phone buzzed once, then again, then again. She turned it face down without checking the name. "That is one missed ceremony," Miles said through the speaker. "Not a surrender. Everyone remember the difference." Elena's shoulders moved with a small exhale. It was the first pressure valve laugh in the room, hardly more than air, but it changed the temperature. By sunset, we had built the first map. Grant's leverage came from 3 places: the distressed loan, the default clause, and a missing disclosure document from the week Elena's father had been hospitalized. The clause said a material family misrepresentation could trigger immediate liquidation unless a spousal asset merger transferred control to Grant Harris Holdings before the deadline. "Elegant," Miles muttered, in the way a trapdoor's elegant. Elena rubbed the side of her thumb against the cheap hanger. "He told me no judge would stop it in time." "He may be right about a full trial," Miles said. "He is wrong about emergency relief." I picked up a marker and circled the missing disclosure line. "Who handled the archive?" Elena looked up. "Grant's office. After my father got sick, Grant offered to digitize our old records. He said it would help with refinancing." "And you trusted him?" Her jaw tightened. "No, my mother did. I was working 18-hour days trying to keep projects alive. I signed the access authorization because I thought I was protecting payroll." There was no self-pity in her voice, only the brutal efficiency of a person making an inventory of damage. "I wrote archive access on the board." Miles made a sound like a pen cap clicking between his teeth. If he controlled the archive, he could control what appeared missing. Elena leaned forward. "And if he created the missing document himself?" "Then we need metadata," I said. She looked at me. There had been a time when that single look would have been enough to pull me straight through my own restraint. I kept my eyes on the board. "Not tonight," I said. "Tonight we preserve what we have, draft the injunction skeleton, and rest." "No," Elena shook her head. We keep going. I pushed a clean notepad toward her. Write down what you remember about the digitization process. Names, dates, vendors, devices. If your handwriting starts drifting off the lines, you go to sleep. That is absurdly specific. It works. She took the pen. You were always impossible to argue with when you made the rule measurable. I almost smiled. You used to argue anyway. Her pen stopped. The room grew quiet around the old wound neither of us had touched. Then she wrote the first name on the pad. We worked until the letters on the whiteboard blurred at the edges. At midnight, Elena's hand slipped once on the trackpad. I closed the laptop from my side of the desk. She looked up sharply. Nathan, you've been awake since before dawn. You fled a wedding, and you just watched the first deadline pass. Cognitive fatigue is now a risk factor. I can still think. Yes, but tomorrow we need more than thinking. We need judgment. I stepped back from the desk and nodded toward the hall. You can take the guest room, or I can call Miles and arrange a secure hotel room. Your call. Either way. I keep the door covered. Her eyes moved toward the hallway, then to the armchair where the dress lay under the soft lamplight. The silk looked less like a gown now and more like evidence. The guest room, she said, but leave the door unlocked. Of course. She stood, then paused beside the armchair. Her fingers touched the lace at the edge of the dress. I bought it, she said. Grant didn't choose it. My mother didn't choose it. I did. And still, when I saw it in the mirror this morning, it looked like someone handing herself over. I crossed the room, but stopped with the chair between us. I lifted the cheap wooden hanger, letting the silk settle so it would not crease. You drove here, I said. Her eyes lifted. That matters. She held my gaze for a moment, then nodded once and went down the hall. I hung the dress on the back of my office door, turned off the lamp, and sat on the sofa with the security monitor glowing silently beside me. I did not sleep. I watched the driveway. I watched the dress. I watched the cheap hanger bend under the weight of a life Elena had almost been forced to wear. By noon on Sunday, Grant stopped sending messengers. He came himself. The intercom buzzed while Elena and I were comparing the digitization vendor invoices against the firm's bank transfers. Miles was on speaker, chewing something loudly enough that Elena had just written, "Please remove popcorn from legal strategy" on the corner of my notepad. The buzz cut through the room. I checked the monitor. Grant Harris stood at my front door in a charcoal suit, his tie slightly crooked. He held a thick manila envelope against his side. His jaw was tight enough to reveal the first honest thing about him. He was angry because the room was no longer his. Elena stood too quickly. The chair rolled back and struck the wall. Don't let him in, she said. I won't. I picked up my recorder and set it on the desk between us. But I need to hear what he brought. Do you want to stay in the office, or do you want to stand where you can see the monitor? She breathed in through her nose and looked at the screen. I want to see. I opened the front door only as far as the chain allowed. Grant's eyes moved past my shoulder, searching for her. Where is she? Safe, I said. His mouth twisted. You have no idea what you're interfering with. I have a whiteboard full of ideas. He slapped the envelope against the door hard enough to make the chain tremble. Give this to her. It's a signed confession from her father, witnessed and notarized, financial negligence, misappropriation, all of it. If she doesn't sign the merger by 9 tomorrow morning, this goes to the licensing board, the state attorney, and every client her sister still has. Behind me, Elena made no sound. Grant leaned closer. You want to play hero? Read? Fine. Tell her she can save her family with one signature, or she can watch me turn her father's name into a headline. I looked at the envelope. Is that a threat? It's a consequence. Consequences can be documented. His eyes flicked toward the porch camera. A muscle moved in his cheek. You think a camera makes you untouchable? No, I said. I think it makes you audible. For the first time, Grant stopped talking. I let the silence do its work. People who build power through pressure hate a room they cannot fill. In a hostage situation, I said quietly, the person talking the loudest is usually the one with the least control. Grant's nostrils flared. "You have until 9. He dropped the envelope through the gap, turned, and walked down the steps. I kept the door closed until his car pulled away. Then I lifted the envelope with a gloved hand and carried it into the office. Elena stood by the monitor, both hands hanging at her sides. "Do you want Miles to open it with us?" I asked. She nodded. I placed the envelope on the desk. Miles's voice came through the speaker, softer now. "Photograph first, open second. Nobody touches the original barehanded." We followed the steps. Chain of custody became its own kind of prayer. Timestamp, photo, gloves, envelope seam, document front, document back, notary stamp, witness signature. Elena read the first paragraph. The color left her face. She set the paper down slowly, then stepped backward until the bookcase stopped her. "He found it," she said. Miles was quiet. I looked at her. "Found what?" She pressed her hand over her mouth for 1 second, then lowered it. "My father did sign something when he was sick. He was on pain medication. Grant's attorney told him it was a temporary disclosure to protect the firm during refinancing. My sister thought it was harmless. I thought she was right." Her voice cracked at the edge but did not break. "If this goes public, it doesn't matter whether the wording was manipulated. The accusation alone ruins him." I moved around the desk but stopped before I reached her. "Tell me what you want to do." She stared at the paper. Her eyes were wet, but her chin lifted. "I want to stop running," she said. Then she looked directly at me. "That's why I left you." The sentence landed with no warning. I did not move. 3 years of questions folded inward so sharply that the room seemed to lose depth. Elena drew a breath. "Grant found out about us before the federal task force finished your background review. He told me he had friends on the city council, people who could flag you as unstable, compromised, a liability. He said if I stayed with you, he would make sure your clearance died before it reached Washington." The cheap wooden hanger hung from the office door behind her. The silk dress swayed faintly in the air conditioning. "He was already tightening the loan around my family then," she said. "I thought if I walked away, he would leave you out of it. I thought I was choosing the smaller damage. For 3 years, I had imagined an empty apartment and a woman who chose silence. Now every unanswered question had Grant Harris's fingerprints on it." I set the document square with the edge of the desk, pulled a fresh legal pad toward me, and uncapped my pen. My hand did not shake. "You protected my career," I said. "Now we use it properly." Elena's eyes searched my face. I did not offer a hug. Not then, not when her guilt was raw and the clock was still running. I gave her what I could give without taking anything from her. A next step. "Miles," I said, "we need the archive metadata, the notary registry, and the server trail on the digitized version." "I'm already calling in favors," Miles said. "Also, and for the record, I hate Grant." "Elena," I said, "do you authorize me to examine the digital archive copies with Miles and prepare a negotiation package?" "Yes," she said, "and I'm doing it with you." That was the moment the room changed. Not because the past was healed. It was not. Not because the fear vanished. It did not. It changed because Elena stopped being the person protected behind a door and became the person working the lock from the inside. We spent the rest of Sunday pulling threads. Elena remembered the vendor name because the technician had spilled coffee on a floor plan and tried to dry it with a heat gun. Miles found the notary record because the stamp number on Grant's confession skipped a digit used only after a statewide system update. I compared the archive file creation date against the holding company's server maintenance logs and found the first seam. The confession had not been scanned from a signed original last year. It had been assembled 4 weeks ago. The notary stamp was real, but copied from an unrelated disclosure. The witness signature had been lifted from a board attendance sheet. The paragraph about misappropriation had been inserted from a template Grant's holding company used in 3 other hostile takeovers. By 3 a.m., the black folder on my desk contained enough evidence for an emergency injunction, a civil fraud complaint, and a negotiation position that would make Grant's attorneys beg him to stop talking. Elena sat across from me with her sleeves pushed up, marking contradictions in red pen. Her hair had come loose from the clip she had used, and there was ink on the side of her wrist. "You know," Miles said through the speaker, voice rough with exhaustion, "most people spend the day after a canceled wedding eating cake with a fork straight from the box." Elena looked at the dress hanging on my office door. "Is that still an option?" "When this is over," I said, "I will personally obtain the least symbolic cake in California." "That sounds romantic." "It will be structurally stable." For the first time since she arrived, Elena laughed. It did not fix the night, but it made the night human. At 8:30 Monday morning, we walked into Grant Harris's corporate headquarters downtown. The building was all glass and polished stone, designed to make visitors see themselves reflected small from every angle. Grant had chosen the boardroom on the top floor. Of course he had. Men like Grant mistook height for authority. Elena carried the canvas tote with the wedding dress folded carefully inside. I carried the black folder. Miles had filed notice with the court and was waiting 2 blocks away with the injunction packet in case Grant refused the offer. Before the boardroom doors, I stopped. "Do you want me to open?" I asked. "Or do you?" Elena adjusted the sleeve of her charcoal blazer. She looked tired. She looked angry. Most importantly, she looked present. "You opened," she said. "I close." I nodded. We entered. Grant sat at the head of the mahogany table with 2 attorneys beside him. The merger documents lay in front of an empty chair, arranged with theatrical precision. He looked at Elena first, then at me, and smiled. "Elena," he said, "you are 29 minutes late to your last reasonable option." She did not sit. Neither did I. I placed the black folder in the center of the table. "We're here to give you one opportunity to release the lien, nullify the spousal asset merger clause, and sever all financial claims against Parker Architecture." Grant laughed once. "You're offering me my own defeat. Bold." "I'm offering you containment." He leaned back. "I don't negotiate with men who hide runaway brides." I opened the folder. The first page was the metadata analysis. The second was the notary discrepancy. The third was the server maintenance log. The fourth was a timeline so simple even arrogance could follow it. "You gave me a document yesterday and represented it as a signed confession from Elena's father." I said. "The archive stamp on the bottom margin shows it was generated inside your holding company's server 4 weeks ago. The notary mark was copied from a separate disclosure. The witness signature was lifted from a board sheet. Your leverage is a forged document used to pressure a marriage contract and seize a family firm." One of Grant's attorneys leaned forward. The other stopped breathing for a moment. That was the one who understood exposure. Grant's smile remained, but the corners no longer matched. "Careful, read." "No," Elena said. Her voice was not loud. Every person in the room looked at her. She stepped forward, placed both palms on the table, and looked directly at Grant. "You don't get to say careful to either of us anymore." Grant's face hardened. Elena reached into the canvas tote and lifted out the wedding dress, still on the cheap wooden hanger. The hanger looked even weaker in the boardroom light, ordinary and almost absurd under the weight of all that silk. She vanished after that summer. I thought, watching her hold the dress in front of the man who had built his power from fear. Today, she returned holding the wedding dress I chose for her, and she finally knew exactly what to do with it. Elena laid the dress across the table. The silk slid over the merger papers and covered Grant's signature line. "This was never a wedding dress," she said. "It was packaging for a takeover." She pulled a pen from her blazer, signed the legal refusal notice Miles had drafted, and placed it on top of the silk. "I am not marrying you. I am not signing your merger. I am not letting you use my father's illness or my sister's license as a leash. You will sign the release. You will confirm in writing that Parker Architecture owes no spousal transfer, no default acceleration, and no personal debt to you or your holding companies." Grant's jaw shifted. "And if I don't?" I slid the final page forward. "Then Miles Hayes files the emergency injunction already prepared 2 blocks away. The court gets the metadata report. Your servers become discoverable. Your attorneys become witnesses to your refusal after notice. His attorney on the left finally spoke. "Grant," she said carefully, "sign the release." The room went silent. In a hostage situation, the person talking the loudest was usually the one with the least control. Grant had filled years with threats, deadlines, contracts, and noise. Now, with the facts laid flat in front of him, he had nothing useful left to say. His hand shook when he picked up his fountain pen. He signed the release. He signed the lien termination. He signed the severance statement. Elena watched every signature. When he shoved the papers back, she did not flinch. "Keep the dress," she said. "I'm setting my own dates from now on." Then she turned and walked out of the boardroom. I followed with the black folder under one arm and the signed release secured inside. Outside, the morning sun bounced off the downtown glass and made the sidewalk painfully bright. Elena stopped near the curb. Cars rushed past. Somewhere behind us, an elevator carried Grant Harris back down into the consequences he had spent years avoiding. Elena looked at the folder. "He's never touching my family again," she said. "Not without crossing documented legal ground," I said. "Your sister still has restructuring work. The firm still needs clean financing, but the leash is cut." She nodded slowly. For a second, the woman on my porch and the woman who had just faced Grant in the boardroom existed in the same breath. "I owe you," she said. "No." She looked up. "You don't owe me," I said. "You gave up 3 years trying to protect my future. I used the career you protected to help you protect yours. That is not debt. That is balance." Her eyes filled, but she did not look away. "I don't want to vanish again." "Then don't." The answer was too simple and not simple at all. A black sedan rolled to the curb. Miles leaned over from the passenger side and pushed the door open. "Get in," he called. "I have court-stamped copies, terrible coffee, and a cake that looks legally meaningless." Elena stared at him. Miles lifted a white bakery box. I said what I said. She laughed then, one hand over her mouth, the sound uneven and astonished. I opened the car door and let her choose whether to climb in first. She did. 3 months later, Parker Architecture reopened its coastal studio. Not with champagne fountains or press releases. Elena refused both. She said if the building had survived Grant Harris, it deserved a quiet morning and decent coffee. I stood near the back of the studio while clients, engineers, and half the neighborhood drifted through the open doors. Blueprints covered the long central table. Her sister, Sarah, argued cheerfully with Miles over whether his handwriting qualified as evidence of character deficiency. Elena's mother cried beside a wall of old project photographs and pretended she was only allergic to dust. On a shelf near the entrance, Elena had placed the cheap wooden hanger. No dress hung from it now. A small brass label beneath it read, "Not everything that carries weight has to be beautiful. It just has to hold until you can set the weight down." I stood looking at it longer than I meant to. Elena came up beside me with 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed me one. "You're staring at my worst decor choice," she said. "It's load-bearing decor." That is the most Nathan Reed compliment I've ever received. It was sincere. I know. She smiled into her cup. That's what makes it worse. The room around us hummed with voices, work, plans, and life continuing in practical pieces. No one looking at Elena would have seen the woman from my porch. They would have seen an architect in a navy blazer, hair clipped back, one sleeve smudged with graphite because she had corrected a drawing in the middle of her own reopening. She looked toward the front table, where Sarah was waving her over. "I need to say something before I get pulled into plumbing arguments." "Say it." She reached into her pocket and took out a small brass key. She set it on the shelf beside the cheap wooden hanger. "I signed the lease on the apartment over the studio," she said. 2 keys came with it. I looked at the key. It was not a rescue flare, not a panic bargain, not a dress carried to a porch with 3 hours left on a deadline. It was a quiet choice placed in public light beside the object that had survived the worst day of her life. "You don't have to answer now," she said. "I know. That was not me trying to be dramatic. I'm practicing healthy pacing." "You've improved." I had a terrifyingly calm teacher. I closed my hand around the key. The metal was warm from her pocket. "I'll help you move the drafting tables this weekend," I said. Her smile softened, but she did not step into me to hide from the room. She stayed beside me, shoulder near mine, facing the studio she had fought to keep. "Good," she said. "They're heavy. Then we'll find where the stress goes." She looked at the cheap wooden hanger, then at the key in my hand. For once, the quiet between us did not feel like something abandoned. It felt like a door left open on purpose. The end.